My wife doesn't want sex. Can I seek it elsewhere? This question comes from the Huffington Post Love Struck column, where trained therapists answer your dating, sex, and relationship dilemmas. I'm not part of Love Struck or the Huffington Post, but I thought this would be a great question to discuss. This dilemma comes from Stuart, who said he's been married for years but is considering looking elsewhere for sex. Okay, so the first question, I guess, is what would you say to Stuart in that situation? He's sitting right across from me, and he says that his wife doesn't want sex. And asks me, can he go out and find it elsewhere? Well, like nobody needs to have my permission to do anything, right? And as a therapist, I'm not here to give you permission to do things. I'm here to help you figure out what you want to do. I'm not here to really give you any advice. Now, I'm talking to you guys. I'm not talking to Stuart right now, but I'm just saying, sometimes people do go to therapy seeking advice on what they should do. And they sometimes get mad that we don't give it or I don't give it. But anyway, the first question I would ask him, though, is, have you discussed this issue with your wife? Now, his answer to that question is going to be very telling. Because if he hasn't, that's one thing. And if he has, that's something else. Now, if you have a problem with somebody in a relationship and you don't say anything, that's a resentment. And when you say something, when you state what the problem is, at that point, you're in a conflict. It's important to know that too, because if you have a lot of things that you're not talking about in your relationship and enough resentments build up, you're going to drift away. And if you do say something, you run the risk of the conflict escalating, depending on the conflict tactics of the parties involved. Okay, so also let me just say about this conflict that it can't be fixed like you would fix a light bulb or change a car tire. It has to be managed. These two people have totally different ideas on the surface, totally two different ideas about sex. One wants sex, one doesn't want sex. And we have to manage those differences to try to keep the family together, keep the marriage together. Now, some people can't tolerate much discord in their relationships and would automatically start threatening it by, hey, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm leaving. You always get your way. A bunch of stuff that's not helpful and end up getting divorced. And then have remorse about getting divorced months later, years later, and that kind of stuff. That happens a lot where people get divorced as a result of poor conflict tactics, and then once they create that distance between them and the other person, really start to realize that, wait a minute, we didn't have to get divorced and this didn't have to happen, and then end up staying involved with each other anyway. So that happens sometimes, not all the time, sometimes. So we gotta be cautious. We can't just start doling out advice and encouraging him to destroy a marriage that's obviously helping him hold his mental health together, and her too, because that's what good relationships do. And all of us are going to be faced with some sexual issues throughout the lifespan. Let's assume that he hasn't discussed this with his wife. He's coming to me first with this. So let's go back to the original question, right? Hey, Stuart, what does it mean to you that your wife doesn't want? You said doesn't want sex. How is she indicating that to you? What did she say? Did she say that, or is she just behaving? You said you hadn't talked to her about it, but how do you know she doesn't want sex? A lot of times when we have problems in relationships or in life in general, when something happens, I place the meaning on it. You place the meaning on it, what it means to you. Now, because you're not having sex, it doesn't necessarily mean that she doesn't want to have sex. It could be a little different. See, we got it depending on what your philosophy is, right? Like if you think she doesn't want to have sex, then you're spending most of your time trying to get her to want to have sex. But if you look at it as if she would have sex with you if she could, then that's a whole different mindset. That's a way of looking at it where now you're working with her to try to figure out what the barriers are, what the obstacles are, that sort of thing. So the way you look at your partner has a lot to do with how this dilemma is going to play out. Now, remember, when you have a conflict with someone, you're always, no matter what you think the conflict is, in this case, she doesn't want to have sex. You think that's the conflict. But really what you are in conflict about is, how do I see myself? How do I see my wife? And how do I see our relationship? Until we drop down and start talking about those things, this stated conflict you can't manage it. And the minute somebody says what the stated difference is, that's the point that I got to start managing my behavior. Don't wait until you feel insulted by the other person. The earlier you realize you're in a conflict, the better chance you get of monitoring yourself during the conflict so that you don't start doing things that are not helpful, that are destructive, that escalate the conflict. Now, here's a place where if you're defensive, it's going to be hard for you to look at some of the contributing factors that may be leading to your perception that she feels like she doesn't want to have sex, especially if you haven't talked to her about it, right? The way you look at her. Now, here's something about human relationships. It's always good to assume that if you're having a problem with somebody, it's because of something that you're doing. Now, I know that's hard because many of us are so defensive and we carry so much shame and guilt and unprocessed trauma that it's very difficult for us to consider that through our own inability to accept personal responsibility, that we might be creating our own problems. So he hasn't discussed it with his wife, and he doesn't really know why she doesn't want to have sex. Because if he hasn't discussed it, then it could be any number of reasons why she doesn't want to have sex. This is why I can't give him any advice. I don't know what the situation is. She's not here to tell me what's going on. I'm taking his account of it. Right? This is something that he believes, and just because he believes it, it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it so. And he doesn't need my permission anyway. So now, if he wanted to consider having sex outside the marriage, if he wanted to consider that, what's your goal, Stuart, for your marriage? Do you want to stay married? Are you ready to try to end the marriage? Do you want to get divorced? What is your goal? Because that's going to determine the next move you make, what you should do. So let's say he wants to save the marriage. Well, if you want to save the marriage, then you have to negotiate with your wife. I think you have to talk to your wife about this. Now, one of the tough things about this is if you haven't talked to your wife about this, I don't know why you haven't talked to her, but if this is something that you can't talk to your wife about, if you want to maintain the marriage and open it up to non-monogamy, that's going to take a level of skill that we need to talk about you developing in order to try to be successful. Sidebar, me personally, I don't think open relationships work. Sidebar. But I can't put that on him. Right? I can't put that on the client, but I don't think they work. Well, they work for some people, let's say, but most people, they're going to be too tired because there's so much stuff. You know, if you can't manage a conflict between you and your primary partner, how you going to open it up for somebody else and have multiple fronts, multiple conflicts going when you can't even talk about what the problem is with your wife? So that's why I'm saying that, right? But you guys do what you want. So this is something that's going to take a little time for us to tease out. It's not going to be cut and dry. A lot of guys going to come in and say, oh, she don't want to have sex. I'm ready to divorce her. Really? Your whole marriage, everything you guys got built up because you guys not having sex? Well, most people are going to go through a period in their life where they're not going to be able to have sex. No relationship is permanent. You're not, what if this was on the other foot? What if you didn't want to have sex for some erectile dysfunction or some other problem? How would you want her to handle it? Would you want her to come in and just say, hey, I want to have sex with other people, or not tell you and just start having sex with other people? So we got to negotiate this stuff. And it's normal throughout the lifespan that your sexuality is going to change. So if you think sex is all about penetration and climax, well, good luck. So if you are going to, the first thing I think we want to try to do is talk to your wife about this. Ask her what she thinks about it. That's where I think we ought to start. And then I think if you want to talk about different types of relationships, it might be a good idea for you to read a book called The Ethical Slut. And that book is all about various types of relationships and various types of sexual situations within relationships. And I think everybody should read it. But if you're thinking about having an open relationship, I certainly think you ought to read it, because that's a book that will explain to you what skills you're going to need, boundaries, how to deal with jealousy, conflicts, what type of agreements you need, what about your health, and then how to find partners. This isn't something I think you're just going to get up off the couch and just start dating people and not have a disaster without talking to your wife and without getting some agreement from her. And no matter what you do, there's going to be some hurt feelings. How are you going to manage that? Another option would be for you and your wife to sit down with a sex therapist, to talk about what your other options are and how you might be able to resolve this. But now, as far as a man talking to me, we need to talk about what you might be doing that might be interfering with your wife's desire to have sex with you, or what you might not be doing that interferes, or maybe even what you've done in the past that may interfere with her desire to not want to have sex with you. If you had affairs in the past, or all this other stuff, sometimes people lose interest in you for health reasons or psychological reasons. It could be a lot of different reasons why she doesn't want to have sex with you. And I don't know that immediately going out to get sex outside the marriage is going to solve that problem. As human beings, we tend to have problems, and if you got one, you got two. You got the problem that you're going through, and then you got what you think about the problem you're going through. And a lot of times what you think about the problem you're going through is worse than the problem that you have. And then when we act on faulty beliefs and assumptions and not talking to the person, but just making up some stuff in our head about what the problem is, we often make the situation worse. So that's what I would be trying to caution him about. Talk to him about this before we just make a rash decision and blow a marriage that in and of itself is leading to you thinking that you want to have another partner, that you're strong enough, you get enough calories, that you could go out and manage a whole another relationship. There's something valuable about the relationship you have right now that's making you feel that way, that you want to put it all on the line. You think you are big, brave, strong, and attractive enough to get something else started on the side. There's something about your marriage that's contributing to that in a positive way. So we need to talk about that. And I would say go slower rather than faster. Don't get out here and just start some stuff without thinking about it. Sex is important. I want to validate the feeling. Sex is important. This is an important aspect of the marriage. No doubt when something happens with the sex in the relationship, when that dies off or when that changes, that's a major problem. That's an emergency. We need to get that relationship into a therapist, psychotherapist or sex therapist, either one, to try to get some help for that couple. But sex is not the only thing, especially as you get older, right? Because everybody's going to lose the ability to have sex in the same way you had it at 20 years old. There's no getting around that. No relationship is permanent. So we got to work on some acceptance, some open-mindedness, some willingness. We got to negotiate. See, here's those skills again, those soft skills. You don't want to be a bull in a china closet and ruin your whole doggone marriage behind a feeling that might evaporate before your divorce will evaporate. You know, divorces are very tough situations to put yourself through and put another person through. I don't know that you want to do that just because you're not having sex. I don't know. People make different choices, but we need to talk about that. But anyway, I put the article, like usual, I put the article in the description below. Get down in the chat. Let me know how you feel about this. Till next time.